You only need one bad decision to lose everything. The crackle of electricity snapped through the humid Texas night, followed by a stunned silence, so heavy it seemed to swallow the sound of traffic half a block away. Red and blue lights flashed across the windshield of a black sedan parked at an angle on the shoulder of Interstate 45, painting the inside of the car in restless colors. Rain tapped softly against the roof. Steam rose from the pavement. And in the driver's seat, a man in a charcoal jacket fought to steady his breathing while an officer stood outside the open door gripping authority like it could never be taken from him. Officer Daniel Mercer had worn a badge for 11 years, and somewhere along the way, he had mistaken it for permission. Tall, broad-shouldered, jaw locked tight, he moved with the confidence of a man who had rarely been challenged and even more rarely corrected. Tonight, his uniform was crisp, his patrol cruiser spotless, his temper short. He looked at the man in the car and saw only what he wanted to see. A black driver, an expensive vehicle, calm eyes that didn't lower fast enough. To Daniel Mercer, that was enough to begin a story in his own mind. Hands where I can see them, he barked again, though the driver's hands had not moved from the steering wheel for the last 2 minutes. The man nodded once. No attitude, no panic, no sudden movement, just control. His name was Marcus Reed, 38 years old, 6 feet tall, with the composed stillness of someone who had spent years learning that calm can be stronger than noise. Water slid down the side window beside him. His watch ticked softly in the dim cabin. "Officer," Marcus said, voice measured and respectful. "My registration is in the glove box. If you'd like, I'll reach slowly." Mercer didn't answer right away. He leaned in, flashlight beams sweeping over leather seats, the center console, a closed briefcase in the passenger footwell. His eyes lingered on the stitched interior, the polished dashboard, the emblem on the steering wheel. Luxury made him angrier than defiance ever could. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus remained still. "Sir, I'm complying. Please tell me why I was stopped." That question landed badly. Mercer straightened, rain darkening the shoulders of his uniform. "You don't ask the questions tonight." Across the highway, a gas station clerk watched from under a canopy. A couple fueling their pickup truck paused mid-conversation. Another patrol unit had not yet arrived. There were only a few witnesses, but enough to make the moment real. Marcus glanced once at the body camera mounted to Mercer's chest, its tiny red light blinking steadily. He noticed everything. The camera, the shaking hand near the taser, the impatience in Mercer's breathing, the smell of wet asphalt drifting through the open door. "Officer," Marcus said quietly, "this is a mistake." Mercer's expression hardened. "Some men hear caution and mistake it for challenge." "Out. Now." Marcus slowly lifted one hand from the wheel. "I'm reaching for my seatbelt." Mercer took one step back, then another half step forward, indecision turning into ego in real time. The next second would later be replayed on local news stations, courtroom monitors, and federal evidence screens. But right then, it was only a dark road, a storm building overhead, and one man deciding he would rather escalate than listen. The taser came up fast. Marcus's eyes narrowed, not with fear, but disappointment. The burst of sound broke the night open. Somewhere in the distance, a truck horn blared. The gas station clerk dropped his coffee. Mercer stood frozen for one breath too long, chest rising hard, as something small slid from Marcus's jacket pocket onto the wet pavement below the open door. A black leather wallet. It opened on impact. Under the flashing patrol lights, a gold badge caught the rain and shined. The gold badge spun once in a shallow puddle before settling face up beneath the patrol lights. Rainwater traced around its edges like silver lines. For one long second, nobody moved. Officer Daniel Mercer stared down at it, as if the object itself had betrayed him. The gas station clerk across the road leaned farther out from under the canopy. The couple beside the pickup truck stopped pumping fuel altogether. Even the highway seemed to hush between passing cars. Marcus Reed remained in the driver's seat, shoulders tight, breathing controlled, eyes fixed forward. He did not reach for the badge. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Mercer crouched slowly, one knee touching the wet asphalt, and picked up the wallet with fingers that no longer looked steady. He opened it wider. Federal credentials. Name. Photograph. Department seal. His flashlight trembled across the letters as though light itself did not want to stay there. Special Agent Marcus Reed. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Mercer swallowed hard. Moments earlier, he had been loud enough for the whole shoulder of Interstate 45 to hear him. Now the night forced him into silence. "Sir," he said at last, but the word came out thin and unfamiliar. Marcus turned his head just enough to look at him. There was no anger in his expression, and somehow that made it worse. "I asked you to listen," Marcus said quietly. The body camera on Mercer's chest kept blinking red, recording every breath, every pause, every change in tone. Mercer glanced at it, and then quickly away. Some truths become heavier the moment you realize they are documented. "I did not know," Mercer said. "You did not ask," Marcus replied. Rain slid from the roofline and dripped onto the open door frame. In the distance, a siren approached, then another. Someone had called for backup, but backup was no longer what Mercer needed. He needed time. He needed the last 3 minutes erased. He needed the version of himself from 10 minutes ago, before arrogance became evidence. A second cruiser rolled onto the shoulder and stopped behind him. Sergeant Linda Carver stepped out, one hand on her hat against the wind. She was a 20-year veteran with the posture of someone who had seen every kind of mistake a badge could make. "What do we have?" she called, walking toward the scene. Mercer opened his mouth, then closed it again. Marcus answered for him. A traffic stop that went very wrong. Carver's eyes moved from Mercer to Marcus to the open wallet in Mercer's hand. She saw the credentials instantly. Her face changed in one controlled motion. "Officer Mercer," she said, voice flat, stepped back from the vehicle. He hesitated, just enough to make it worse. "Now." Mercer obeyed. Carver approached Marcus carefully. "Sir, are you injured?" "I will be evaluated," Marcus said. "I also want all footage preserved immediately." Carver nodded once. "It will be." Mercer looked around as if searching for an ally, but the witnesses were no longer his audience. They were observers. The gas station clerk had a phone raised now. The couple by the pickup whispered to each other without looking away. Power shifts quietly before it shifts publicly. "This was a misunderstanding," Mercer said, trying to gather himself. Carver turned to him with a stare sharp enough to cut through rain. "Then you can explain it in your report." Marcus finally stepped out of the sedan. He moved carefully, straightening his jacket, collecting the briefcase from the passenger side. He stood 6 feet from Mercer, calm as ever, rain dotting his shoulders. "You stopped the wrong car tonight," Mercer muttered. Marcus shook his head once. "No, officer. You stopped the wrong habits tonight." Another set of lights approached, brighter this time, darker vehicles behind them. Unmarked. Doors opened in practiced rhythm. Men and women in plain clothes stepped into the rain with badges already visible. Mercer's face drained of color as Marcus looked toward them and spoke for words that changed the air completely. "My team is here." The unmarked SUVs rolled onto the shoulder like shadows with headlights. Doors opened almost in unison, and 4 agents stepped into the rain wearing plain jackets over business clothes, their badges already visible before their feet hit the pavement. They moved with the kind of calm precision that came from training, not theater. No shouting, no wasted motion, just certainty. Officer Daniel Mercer took 1 step backward without realizing he had moved at all. Sergeant Linda Carver remained beside her cruiser, reading the scene faster than anyone else there. The gas station clerk lowered his phone for a moment, then raised it again. Some nights become stories before they are even over. Marcus Reed stood straight beside his sedan, rain collecting at the shoulders of his charcoal jacket. The discomfort in his breathing had not vanished, but his composure had returned fully. He looked less like a man who had been stopped on the roadside, and more like someone who had arrived exactly where he intended to be. The lead agent approached first, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a navy windbreaker. "Special Agent Dana Collins," she said, showing credentials to Carver and then briefly to Mercer. "We are taking point from here." Carver gave a single nod. She knew jurisdiction when she saw it. Mercer tried to speak before the moment closed around him. This was a routine stop. Collins turned to him with no emotion at all. Routine is a word people use when they hope no one checks the details. One of the other agents moved to Marcus. "Sir, are you able to continue?" Marcus answered quietly. "I am. Preserve every recording. Vehicle dash camera, body camera, dispatch audio, traffic feeds, if available." "Already in motion," the agent replied. Mercer's eyes snapped toward the blinking camera on his chest again. He reached instinctively for it, But Carver's voice stopped him cold. Do not touch that device. The command landed harder than anything else had. It came not from federal authority, but from his own chain of command. Sometimes the first fall is hearing your own side step away. Sergeant, Mercer said, lowering his voice, you know me. Carver did not blink. That is exactly why I am disappointed. Rain intensified, drumming on hoods and roofs, washing oil streaks toward the gutter. Highway lights reflected in every puddle. Collins glanced toward Marcus, then back to Mercer. Do you know who he is beyond the credentials? Mercer said nothing. He had learned enough already to fear more. Collins continued. Special Agent Reed has spent the last 7 months attached to a joint federal task force reviewing misconduct complaints, evidence handling failures, and internal retaliation allegations in 3 counties. The words seemed to thin the air. The couple at the gas pump exchanged a look. Carver's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Mercer's face lost what little confidence remained. Tonight, Collins said. He was returning from a secured meeting. Marcus finally spoke again, voice calm and steady. I was carrying signed warrants for records requests scheduled to be served at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Mercer stared at him. You set me up? Marcus shook his head once. No, you revealed yourself. There are moments when a person realizes the trap was never outside them. It was inside them all along. Another agent approached with a tablet already in hand. Dispatch confirms no stolen vehicle report, no matching suspect bulletin, and no traffic violation logged prior to the stop. Collins accepted the tablet, glanced once, then looked at Mercer. So let us remove those excuses now before they multiply. Mercer opened his mouth, then closed it. For years, confidence had filled every silence for him. Tonight, silence answered back. Marcus bent slightly, picked up the leather wallet Collins had placed on the hood of his car, and slid the badge inside. The movement was simple, almost gentle. Yet Mercer watched it like a judge watches a sentence being written. Officer Mercer, Collins said, stepping closer. You are being advised to remain available for questioning. Do not leave the scene. Do not contact anyone regarding this incident. Mercer looked past her toward the dark highway, toward freedom measured in lanes and miles. But no road opens when consequences arrive first. Marcus met his eyes one final time and spoke in a tone almost softer than the rain. This stop was 5 minutes long. The damage will take years. Rain kept falling long after the shock had passed. Water streamed along the shoulder of Interstate 45, carrying dirt, oil, and the last traces of a moment Officer Daniel Mercer would spend years wishing he could outrun. The federal agents had spread across the scene with quiet efficiency. One photographed the position of both vehicles. Another logged witness names from the gas station. A third spoke with dispatch supervisors over a secure line. No raised voices. No drama. Just procedure. That alone unsettled Mercer more than anger ever could. He stood near the front bumper of his cruiser, hands at his sides, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the traffic lanes. Sergeant Linda Carver watched him the way experienced people watch storms they already recognize. Take a breath, she said. You are going to need your judgment now more than ever. Mercer gave a dry laugh with no humor in it. A little late for that. Carver did not respond. Some truths are too obvious to repeat. Across from them, Marcus Reed sat on the lowered tailgate of an SUV while a federal medic checked his pulse and asked calm questions. Marcus answered politely, never exaggerating, never performing pain for sympathy. His restraint only sharpened the contrast between the two men. Collins approached Mercer holding a small evidence envelope. Inside was the cartridge from the device used minutes earlier. Chain of custody begins now, she said to the recording agent beside her, then looked directly at Mercer. You understand the seriousness of that. Mercer finally lifted his head. I made a split-second decision. Collins nodded once. That phrase has protected many bad decisions. He took a step forward, frustration breaking through fear. You are acting like I am some criminal. Marcus looked over from the SUV before Collins could answer. No, he said evenly. We are acting like records matter. Silence followed him again. It seemed to belong to him more than words did. Carver folded her arms against the rain. Daniel, tell the truth now. Why did you stop him? Mercer hesitated too long. Then he reached for the safest lie available. Vehicle matched a description. The agent with the tablet spoke without looking up. We already checked. No such bulletin issued tonight. Mercer's jaw tightened. I thought the plates were suspicious. Temporary tags valid and current, the agent replied. Every excuse arrived weak and left weaker. The gas station clerk, now wrapped in a hoodie, quietly told another agent what he saw. No swerving, no speeding, no erratic movement, just lights activated behind a sedan that had signaled and pulled over cleanly. Piece by piece, the ordinary facts became extraordinary evidence. Collins stepped closer. Do you know what often destroys careers? Mercer said nothing. Not one mistake, she continued. The lies people stack on top of it. Traffic hissed past in the wet dark. Somewhere overhead, thunder rolled far away. Marcus rose from the tailgate and walked toward his car, moving carefully but steadily. He opened the rear door and removed the locked briefcase from the seat. Collins met him halfway. Still sealed, she asked. Yes, Marcus said. And still due downtown by morning. Mercer stared at the case as if it held the rest of his night inside it. In a way, it did. Carver noticed the look. What is in there? She asked. Marcus regarded her for a moment, then answered plainly. Audit files, complaint summaries, and draft subpoenas tied to officer misconduct cases. Mercer's face changed in a single instant. Recognition, fear, memory. The names inside that case might include colleagues, friends, supervisors, maybe even his own. You came here for us, he said. Marcus shook his head. I was already here because of choices people made long before tonight. Another federal SUV arrived carrying internal affairs representatives from the city. Carver exhaled slowly. The circle was widening now. Mercer looked around at the lights, the badges, the cameras, the witnesses. A roadside stop had become a crossroads. Can I call my union rep? He asked quietly. Collins answered. You may call counsel when instructed. For now, remain where you are. Mercer nodded once, smaller than before. The rain finally began to lighten, but no one mistook that for mercy. Marcus placed the briefcase into Collins's hands and looked at Mercer with the calm sadness reserved for preventable endings. You saw a threat because you never learned to see people, he said. That lesson is going to be expensive. By 11:40 that night, the roadside scene had become an investigation zone. Cones redirected traffic. Additional patrol units sat farther back with lights dimmed low. Federal vehicles formed a second perimeter. The rain had reduced to a mist that floated under the highway lamps like smoke. Officer Daniel Mercer remained where he had been instructed to stand, near the rear quarter panel of his cruiser, no longer the center of authority, but the subject of it. For the first time in years, he had nowhere to move that mattered. Agent. Dana Collins reviewed witness statements one by one beneath the open hatch of an SUV. The gas station clerk described seeing Marcus read, keep both hands visible, and speak calmly. The couple from the pickup confirmed there had been no reckless driving before the stop. Dispatch logs showed no lawful basis entered into the system before Mercer activated his lights. Body camera footage was downloading to a secure drive as they spoke. Every ordinary detail had become a brick in a wall closing around him. Sergeant Linda Carver stepped aside to answer a call from headquarters. When she returned, her expression had changed from concern to decision. Command has placed you on immediate administrative suspension, she told Mercer. Badge, firearm, cruiser access, and credentials are revoked pending review. Mercer stared at her as if he had misheard the language of his own profession. You are suspending me out here on the shoulder? Carver held out her hand. No, your choices did that. I am just delivering the paperwork. He looked at the badge pinned to his chest, then at the dozens of times it had opened doors, ended arguments, and excused behavior no one challenged. Slowly, he unclipped it and placed it in her palm. The small metal sound it made against her wedding ring was barely audible, yet everyone nearby seemed to hear it. Some losses are loud because of what they mean. Marcus Reed stood several yards away beside Collins, speaking with another agent over a tablet. He had changed nothing about his posture. No gloating, no smirk, no desire to humiliate the man who had tried to humiliate him. That restraint unsettled Mercer more than punishment did. You could stop this, Mercer said suddenly, voice carrying through the damp air. Heads turned. Marcus looked over calmly. Stop what? This circus. The reports. The charges. You know how one moment can get out of hand. Marcus walked closer until they stood 10 feet apart. Highway wind tugged at their jackets. One moment, Marcus said softly. You mean the moment you decided I did not deserve the same patience you would have given someone else? Mercer opened his mouth, but no words arrived. Collins stepped in with a folder. Preliminary findings indicate possible civil rights violations, unlawful use of force, false reporting exposure, and obstruction concerns if statements are altered. She handed the folder to an internal affairs captain who had just arrived. This will move fast. Mercer's face drained again. How fast? The captain answered plainly. Fast enough that you should stop talking. Midnight crept closer. A tow truck hooked Mercer's cruiser for impound processing because the in-car system contained evidence. Watching his patrol car lifted onto the flatbed seemed to strike him harder than the suspension notice. For years, that cruiser had been an extension of his identity. Tonight, it was property tagged for review. Carver approached Marcus quietly. Agent Reed, on behalf of this department, I am sorry. Marcus gave a small nod. Respectfully, Sergeant, save apologies for people who never had cameras. She lowered her eyes for a moment because she understood exactly what he meant. Collins then turned to Mercer one final time. You asked earlier if we were treating you like a criminal. No, we are treating you like everyone else should have been treated from the beginning. By the book. Mercer watched the flatbed pull away, carrying the last symbol of certainty he had left. Red taillights faded into the wet darkness. Marcus retrieved his own keys, glanced once at the highway stretching north, and said in a voice almost too calm to be heard, "Some men think power is what they can take from others. Tonight you learn power can also be removed." By sunrise, the rain was gone, but the storm had only changed addresses. Inside the downtown federal building, lights glowed on 3 floors where people who normally worked in silence were suddenly working fast. Evidence files moved from inboxes to conference tables. Supervisors who usually scheduled meetings weeks ahead were requesting them within the hour. Screens replayed roadside footage frame by frame. Every pause, every command, every decision from the shoulder of Interstate 45 now lived in permanent detail. Marcus Reed sat in a quiet medical office on the 7th floor, answering routine questions and signing forms. With the same steady hand he had shown all night. He had slept none, yet looked less tired than many of the people around him. Some exhaustion comes from being targeted. Other exhaustion comes from realizing you helped create the target. Agent Dana Collins entered carrying coffee and a legal pad thick with notes. She placed one cup beside him. You should rest. Marcus gave a faint smile. I will after the paperwork stops reproducing. Collins sat across from him. You know this is bigger now. Marcus looked through the glass wall toward agents moving quickly down the hallway. It was already bigger. Last night only made it visible. She nodded because that was true. The task force had spent months reviewing complaints tied to traffic stops, selective enforcement patterns, missing camera footage, and retaliatory discipline against officers who reported misconduct. Many cases lacked a clean turning point. Last night delivered one in high definition. Across town, Daniel Mercer sat alone in a borrowed office at police headquarters with no badge on his chest and no access card that worked. The walls still held framed photos of academy classes and charity events, but none of it looked like protection anymore. An internal affairs lieutenant placed a transcript on the desk. Read page 6, he said. Mercer scanned the lines and saw his own words typed cleanly beneath timestamps. Commands repeated. Contradictions highlighted. The kind of language that sounded normal in the moment and indefensible by daylight. I was under pressure, Mercer muttered. The lieutenant did not sit down. Everyone in this building is under pressure. That is why judgment matters. News moved faster than either institution. By 8:15 a.m. local station aired helicopter footage of the overnight scene. By 8:40 another channel had obtained witness interviews. By 9 o'clock social media accounts were replaying the phrase Special Agent Marcus Reed thousands of times beside screenshots of Mercer's cruiser being towed away. Commentators debated training, bias, accountability, unions, body cameras, and trust. Some defended procedure. Others asked why procedure had not begun sooner. Outside headquarters, a small crowd formed with signs calling for transparency. Inside, commanders suddenly rediscovered urgency. Marcus was called into a secure conference room where federal prosecutors joined by video. One attorney adjusted her glasses and spoke directly. We are evaluating potential charges. Your testimony will matter, but so will pattern evidence. She slid a chart onto the screen showing prior complaints connected to Mercer. Dates. Allegations. Outcomes marked inconclusive, unfounded, insufficient evidence. Marcus studied the rows quietly. How many people did not have cameras? No one answered right away. Silence can confess what records avoid. Collins broke it softly. Too many. At noon, Sergeant Linda Carver requested a private meeting with Marcus. She entered without uniform cap, carrying only a folder and the weight of someone trying to do one honest thing before the day ended. I submitted a statement, she said, about previous concerns I raised regarding Mercer's conduct. Marcus looked at her carefully. Why now? Carver did not hide from the question. Because last night showed me what delay costs. She handed over the folder. Inside were dated emails, supervisor responses, and recommendations ignored. Marcus accepted it with a slow nod. Then today can still matter. Meanwhile, Mercer's attorney arrived and asked for all questioning to stop. The request came late enough to signal fear, early enough to signal strategy. By evening, legal analysts on television were already discussing exposure measured not in days, but in years. Marcus left the building after dark through a side entrance. Cameras shouted questions from behind barriers. He did not stop. He only paused once beneath the city lights and looked back at the federal seal above the doors. Last night one man had mistaken silence for weakness. Today an entire system was learning silence can also be evidence waiting its turn. 3 weeks later, the city had learned a new habit, checking updates before breakfast. What began on a wet highway shoulder had become the story every newsroom wanted first and every department wanted behind them. Each morning brought another document release, another witness statement, another retired official explaining how accountability should have happened sooner. The phrase ongoing investigation appeared so often it sounded less like policy and more like confession. Inside the federal courthouse, elevators opened and closed on floors where names once protected by rank were now printed on visitor logs. Marcus Reed walked those halls quietly, carrying folders instead of headlines. He had returned to regular duty in theory, but nothing around him felt regular anymore. Every reporter recognized his face. Every young agent watched how he handled pressure. Every older one watched whether he carried bitterness. He carried neither. He carried discipline. Agent Dana Collins joined him outside courtroom 4B just after 9 o'clock in the morning. You ready? She asked. Marcus adjusted the knot of his tie and looked through the narrow glass panel in the courtroom door. Ready is not the right word, he said. But I am here. Inside, prosecutors were presenting probable cause findings tied to civil rights violations, false statements, and misuse of authority. The hearing itself was procedural, but the room felt historic. Rows of seats were filled with attorneys, reporters, community observers, and officers pretending not to recognize one another. Some came for justice. Some came for damage control. Daniel Mercer entered through a side door with counsel beside him. Gone was the uniform that once announced him before he spoke. In its place was a dark suit that fit well enough but could not hide the collapse in his posture. He looked older than 3 weeks. Public disgrace has a way of speeding the calendar. He glanced across the room and saw Marcus seated near the prosecution table. For a second, their eyes met. Marcus offered nothing dramatic. No glare. No satisfaction. Just the calm expression of a man who had told the truth and let time do the rest. The judge called the room to order. Evidence summaries began. Dispatch logs showed no lawful basis for the stop. Video demonstrated compliance. Follow-up statements conflicted with recorded facts. Prior complaints, once isolated and dismissed, now formed patterns when viewed together. Piece by piece, ordinary paperwork became extraordinary weight. Mercer's attorney argued stress, uncertainty, split-second judgment, administrative overreach. It was a practice performance, but even polished arguments struggle against timestamps. During a recess, cameras crowded the hallway rope lines. Commentators whispered into microphones while interns sprinted for coffee. Sergeant Linda Carver stood near a pillar in civilian clothes, hands clasped tightly. Marcus approached her. You did not have to testify, he said. Carver gave a tired smile. I did if I wanted to recognize myself afterward. She looked toward the courtroom doors. I should have spoken louder sooner. Marcus nodded once. Most systems survive on that sentence. Back inside, prosecutors referenced sentencing exposure if convictions followed. Numbers were discussed in measured legal language, but one figure moved through the gallery like electricity. 15 years. Not guaranteed. Not symbolic. Possible. Real. Mercer heard it and lowered his eyes to the defense table. For the first time, consequences had a measurable length. The judge scheduled trial dates and denied several requests to delay. The public interest in timely resolution is substantial, he said. Court recessed. Benches scraped. Conversations exploded at once. Reporters rushed exits. Legal analysts began recording reactions before they had reached the sidewalk. Marcus gathered his notes slowly. Collins stepped beside him. You know people will call this your victory. Marcus slid the papers into his briefcase. Then they misunderstand victory. What is it then? She asked. He looked back at the empty witness stand. Victory would be if none of this had been necessary. Outside, flashes lit the courthouse steps as Mercer was guided toward a waiting vehicle. He kept his head down, not from cameras alone, but from the burden of seeing himself clearly at last. Marcus exited through another door into warm afternoon sunlight. Protesters, officers, clerks, and strangers all turned as he passed. Some nodded, some stared, some said thank you. He did not stop walking. The city wanted a symbol, but he remained a man on his way to work. Behind him, the courthouse doors closed with a heavy sound that echoed across the plaza like a reminder. Power can delay truth, but it cannot sentence it. For months later, the trial had become the kind of event people rearranged schedules to watch. Lines formed outside the federal courthouse before sunrise. Reporters in press jackets rehearsed opening lines beneath portable lights. Retired officers gave interviews nobody had requested a year earlier. Activists held signs about reform. Tourists asked what was happening. Everyone wanted to witness the moment consequences either became real or slipped away again. Inside courtroom 7A, polished wood reflected the soft overhead lights, and the seal behind the bench seemed larger than usual. Some symbols grow heavier when they are finally tested. Marcus Reed sat at the prosecution table waiting to testify, hands folded, suit immaculate, expression unreadable. He had spent months being discussed by strangers, praised by supporters, doubted by critics, and studied by institutions. Yet in person he remained what he had been on the roadside that night, composed, observant, unwilling to perform emotion for anyone. Agent Dana Collins leaned toward him. You know the cameras outside will say this day is about you. Marcus kept his eyes on the witness stand. Then they will be wrong again. Daniel Mercer entered with his attorneys a minute later. Even before he sat down, the room felt the difference between then and now. No badge, no radio, no easy confidence. He carried folders instead of authority. His shoulders were narrower somehow, as if months of headlines had weight measured in inches. When he looked toward the jury box, he did not see admiration or fear. He saw 12 citizens instructed to notice facts. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Proceedings began with witness sequencing, evidence stipulations, and arguments over language that once might have seemed technical. But every technical point now mattered. Body camera timestamps, dispatch entries, search procedures, policy manuals, complaint histories. Systems are built from details, and so are failures. Prosecutors called Marcus to the stand before lunch. He took the oath in a voice steady enough to quiet the gallery. Questions started simply: name, role, assignment, route traveled that evening. Then came the stop itself. Marcus described keeping his hands visible, asking for instructions, attempting to de-escalate, and recognizing early that the interaction was not being driven by evidence. He never raised his voice. He never embellished. Jurors leaned forward anyway. Truth told calmly often lands harder than outrage. On cross-examination, Mercer's attorney tried another path. Agent Reed, is it possible Officer Mercer was reacting to uncertainty rather than bias? Marcus considered the question before answering. Uncertainty asks questions. Bias skips to conclusions. Pens moved quickly in the jury box. The attorney shifted. You cannot know what was in his mind. Marcus met his gaze. No, but I know what was absent from his actions. Even the judge paused before calling for the next exhibit. During recess, the hallway buzzed with whispered summaries. Legal analysts spoke into cameras about credibility. Community leaders discussed precedent. Sergeant Linda Carver stood near a vending machine holding untouched coffee. She watched Marcus exit the courtroom and said quietly, "You made it impossible to look away." Marcus accepted a paper cup of water from Collins. People looked away long before me. Afternoon testimony brought policy experts and forensic video specialists. They explained procedure, camera integrity, escalation standards, report inconsistencies, and why the written narrative failed to match the recorded sequence. Each witness added structure to what emotion had already told the public. Mercer spent most of it staring at a legal pad without writing. Late in the day, prosecutors introduced sentencing ranges tied to potential convictions. Again, the numbers surfaced in the room like a distant thunderclap. 15 years. Some spectators inhaled sharply. Others nodded as if they had been waiting to hear a number large enough to feel like accountability. Mercer finally looked up then, face pale beneath courtroom lights. For the first time, time itself seemed to be looking back at him. Court adjourned at 4:37. Chairs scraped. Deputies guided movement. Reporters sprinted for exits. Marcus gathered his notes slowly and stepped down from the witness stand with the same measured pace he had shown since night one. Outside, cameras shouted his name. He did not stop. Behind him, the courtroom doors closed on murmurs, evidence boxes, and a man learning that arrogance can last minutes while judgment can last years. The verdict came on a bright Thursday morning, the kind of clear Texas day that made the courthouse windows shine like polished glass. By 7 a.m., the plaza outside was already full. Reporters adjusted microphones. Camera crews tested sound levels. Former officers stood beside ministers, students beside attorneys, families beside strangers who simply wanted to witness whether the system could correct one of its own. Some came hopeful. Some came skeptical. Many came carrying old disappointments. Inside courtroom 7A, every seat was filled before the clerk called the room to order. Even the standing room along the back wall disappeared early. People spoke in whispers, then stopped speaking altogether when the judge entered. The silence felt earned. Marcus Reed sat in the front row near the prosecution table, no longer a witness, but still central to everything. He wore a navy suit, white shirt, dark tie, and the same calm expression that had unsettled arrogance from the beginning. Agent Dana Collins sat beside him reviewing notes she no longer needed. Across the aisle, Daniel Mercer waited with his attorneys. Months of litigation had carved humility into places confidence once lived. He looked smaller than the uniform had ever allowed. The jury filed in at 9:03. Faces neutral. Steps measured. 12 people carrying the weight of facts and the expectations of a city. The foreperson stood when asked if a verdict had been reached. "We have, Your Honor." Pens froze. Cameras outside the room seemed to hold their breath through walls. The clerk read the counts one by one. Guilty on deprivation of rights under color of law. Guilty on false statements. Guilty on obstruction-related findings tied to altered reporting attempts. Guilty on additional administrative fraud counts connected to record misuse uncovered during the investigation. Each word landed separately, but together they formed the sound of a door closing. Mercer lowered his head. One attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, then removed it when no comfort came back. The judge thanked the jury and scheduled immediate sentencing arguments due to the extensive pretrial record. The courtroom remained seated, unwilling to lose the moment by moving too quickly. Later that afternoon, after recess and submissions, the judge returned for sentencing. He spoke carefully, not to create drama but to preserve meaning. A badge is a public trust, not a private weapon. When authority is misused, the injury reaches beyond one person. It damages confidence in every lawful encounter that follows. He reviewed aggravating factors, prior warnings, dishonesty after the incident, and the broader harm caused by selective enforcement. Then he pronounced the sentence. 15 years in federal prison. Audible reactions moved through the room like wind through leaves. Some gasped. Some cried quietly. Some closed their eyes as if finally setting down something heavy. Mercer stood motionless for a second too long before deputies guided him to procedure. He turned once, not toward cameras, not toward lawyers, but toward Marcus Reed. Whatever he meant to say never reached his mouth. Marcus rose only after Mercer was gone from view. Collins looked at him. How does it feel? He considered the question with the same patience he had shown from the roadside to the witness stand. Necessary, he said. Not joyful. Necessary. Outside, the courthouse steps exploded with noise. Questions shouted from every direction. Microphones stretched forward like branches. Community leaders called it accountability. Critics called it overdue. Commentators called it historic. Marcus walked into the sunlight and paused at the top of the steps. Below him stood a crowd made of people who had never met, but understood the moment for personal reasons. He did not raise his fists. He did not celebrate. He simply spoke once, clearly enough for the nearest cameras to carry it farther than the plaza. Respect should never depend on who is watching. Then he descended the steps and moved through the crowd without escort. Just another man in a city learning something difficult and valuable at the same time. Behind him, the courthouse doors closed with a deep echo across the stone. He had worn silence when others were arrogance. And in the end, silence had testified louder than either badge or pride ever could.